So here today in the home, and thank God that we scheduled it to be here because Dr. Larry Trumka, originally from Mexico City, and now he's here in Tulsa. Divinity, I think, brought us together. You come in for a cut and a shave, and then this last week you fell.
I broke my knee. Yep.
You fell. Okay, so the reason we're here is because of what you do. What do you do?
I'm a psychiatrist, and it's called forensic psychiatry, meaning that not dead people, but that I work in the prison system.
So there's nobody outside the Department of Corrections that has that title?
You have to be in a jail or a prison, work there to be called forensic.
And something I didn't know, there's a huge difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And what is that?
Well, psychologists after high school, they go through 4 years of training, and sometimes some go 6 to be a clinical psychologist after high school. But a psychiatrist needs to go to medical school for 8 years, and then after that, you do a residency in psychiatry for another 4 years.
You're actually an MD.
Yes.
Technically a specialized MD, and your specialization is psychiatry.
Yes.
So like somebody else may do the same thing you did, but they may be a heart doctor or a brain surgeon or whatever, but yours is psychiatry.
Right.
What made you take that road?
Well, in medicine in general, I originally thought about being an internal medicine doctor, but when you're an internist, they really don't pay attention to the mind or people's feelings. So I thought if you go into psychiatry, I know about medicine, but if you're a psychiatrist, you deal more with emotions, feelings, that kind of thing.
Being from Mexico City, did you go to medical school there or here?
In Mexico City.
And what did you have to do to be in practice here?
Well, you have to pass 2 very hard exams, like 3-day exams. Then after that, you have the eligibility to go into a residency program.
So you have to do residency here?
Yeah, 4 years.
Okay. Did you do residency in Mexico and here?
No, I did medical school in Mexico, and then I came to the United States and went to the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
Right in the center of the state.
Yep.
And that's where I did my 4-year residency.
And did you know then you wanted to be in the Department of Corrections or no?
No, I came to Tulsa because my ex, her family was from here, so I didn't have anywhere else to go. So I came to Tulsa, and I started my private practice.
So you were in private practice first?
Yes.
Okay. And then what happened for you to go in the Department of Corrections?
I had a friend that said that working in the Tulsa jail was a real good deal, and so I decided to try it out, and it went pretty well, and I liked it, and so I decided to stick with it.
So are you considered a contractor or are you an employee of the state?
At first I was a contractor. I worked at the Tulsa jail, Oklahoma County jail, and then I went to the prisons, Correctional Corporation of America, which are private-owned prisons, Holdenville and Cushing, and I worked total for those places 17 years.
Okay.
And then I got smart and decided to go to the Department of Corrections because of the benefits. Contractor, you don't get any benefits.
So working for private industry, you're a contractor. When you go to state facilities, then you become an employee of the state.
And then you get sick leave, annual leave,
retirement.
So
could you work in a federal prison?
Yes.
But you would become a federal employee then, right?
The benefits are a little bit better.
Okay. Normally, I kind of have things off the top of my head. I'm just going to go through some things here. Is there a race or gender or a group of people that seem to suffer more from mental illness?
Yes. Usually it's the white race and females. I go to a female prison once a week.
Why do you think that racially and genderously that those two are more of a target group?
Well, because usually blacks don't complain as much about mental illness. Hispanics, Latinos, they're very stoic people. They usually have a lot of family support, and I think they view mental illness as a deficiency.
So I'm going to read this. The U.S. justice system says there's about 1,566 state prisons, 98 federal prisons, 3,116 local jails, 1,300 juvenile correctional facilities, 181 immigration detention facilities, 80 tribal and county jails, military prisons. In 2021, the United States had 1,767,200 inmates in adult facilities. This year was the highest prison population, and over half of those were violent criminals. I also researched that America, per capita people, has the highest incarceration rate.
Yes.
And Oklahoma has the highest incarceration rate of females.
And males
Per capita.
close second.
From where you sit and what you've seen, what is going on?
Well, I think the main cause of incarceration is the drug addiction. And drugs account, last I heard, 95% of incarcerations have something to do with drugs. They either got caught manufacturing, selling, they go and rob a store or rob an individual to get money for drugs, methamphetamine especially nowadays. And so it's very punishable.
Could we say then that we have a bigger drug problem here than other countries?
I believe so, yes.
What's the reason we have so many broken females?
The main causes is they were victims of sexual abuse, physical abuse, and of course with those two, it's always emotional abuse.
Right.
Lack of adequate parenting. The parents are usually drug addicts as well. And it's easy because when they're growing up, if their parents are using drugs with their friends or anything, they're not paying attention to the kids, which they need. And there's no logical consequences to their behavior, which parents should always have. If you do this, it's a punishment. And they overlook it. When they're high on drugs, they let them do whatever they want.
One of my majors of study was psychology, and one of the things I found out, they call it the molding years, the shaping years. They say from basically 8 months to 8 to 10 years old. Do you agree with that? That typically if you research most of your clientele, by the time they're 10, most of this habitual mental, emotional road that they're on has already begun?
Yes.
Okay. And so I did some research years ago when I worked in a school, a charter school here in Tulsa. It was 99% minority. And so I did some homework because a lot of my kids that I had, their dads were incarcerated or killed, single moms, or living with their aunts because their mom and dad are both in prison. And so I did some research, and I talked to some really higher education people that studied. They weren't so much in education as they knew education and studied it. And then I found that the two things that in the 90 percentile, and I'd love your input on this, that male and females had in common that are incarcerated was a form of illiteracy when it came to reading and comprehension.
Yes.
And the lack of a good father figure or a male role model in their life.
Yes.
And that those two things, 90%, males, females, blacks, whites, is how they end up institutionalized or under psychiatric care. Do you see that? Is that something you've seen?
Well, one example that comes to mind is, for instance, I'm not racist of any kind, but the black community, usually the dad or the friends are selling drugs, using and selling. And so when the children grow up, who's the one that has fancy cars and who's the one that has the most girls with him? It's a drug dealer. So when they're growing up and they can see, well, should I work for McDonald's or should I work for this other company, Amazon or whatever? If I can make 50 times that amount selling drugs, the choice for them is pretty obvious until they get caught.
Do you feel like a lot of the women catch almost what we in surfing they call the second or third wave, like that they're indirectly involved? I mean, that mainly the men and stuff that they're associating with pull them into drugs and violent crimes, and that's how they get in? Or do you feel that blacks and white females across the board, they're committing their own crimes, doing their own drug dealing, or do you feel like they get kind of secondary charges and stuff brought in on them from hanging out with the wrong guys?
Yes, for selling the drugs, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Which is profitable until they get caught.
You said something a minute ago too about basically sexual immorality and wrong sexual doing with young females. Statistically, in black communities and the black culture, the lower economical, that it's dramatically higher. They say that I think it's 1 in 11 young black females before the age of 18 will be touched or multiple interactions sexually by somebody, family, friend, whatever. How do we, I mean, do you see that with the women you see, that a lot of them, it's not an abduction or a rape, it's somebody in their circle?
Yes. Well, the people that I have talked to treat, it's mainly white females that have been victims of abuse of any one kind or
Really?
another.
More than young black females?
Yes. Or it could be because the black females don't talk about it.
Oh, I see. Because, yeah, I
The
did some
females,
research.
yes.
So,
The white females.
white girls are more open about it. And is it typically somebody in their circle?
Yes.
So I say this in my seminars and stuff a lot. I hate the term stranger danger because a lot of times the people that victimize are people that you trust and have opportunity. And so we need to start teaching our kids that it's not always stranger danger,
Yes.
that it's people that you may trust, teachers, uncles, grandpas.
Priest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When you realize that a young female, you being a male therapist, so how do you build that trust when they have to have trust issues with any man?
Yes. Well, I built some trust by getting to know them, asking them questions, personal questions like where they're from, how many friends they have, what kind of family they have, how often they stay in touch with family. And then after that, you start asking the clinical questions. And they can see that, you're a person that's trustworthy, that you're there to help them. And so they open up to you and tell you what's going on with them.
Do you find that it's odd for them to have a male that's wanting to help them and doesn't want anything in return?
I would believe they think that, yes.
And so that they probably start looking at you as a dad. They probably start feeling an emotional connection to you because you may be the first guy in their life that cared without wanting something from them.
Ooh, I hadn't thought about that, but that's pretty surprising. But yeah, there's an element of that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that would be if you're the first person that actually reached into me
That
and
really
cared about me, right? I mean, how many of those females in your lifetime that you sat in front of had a man that had no ulterior motive ask them questions of sincerity?
Yes, not very many.
Right. I can see that. Has prison and incarceration become a response or a catch-all for our social problems that we're encountering now, do you think?
Well, I think definitely, especially in Oklahoma, there are too many people that are incarcerated. And a lot of them are not for serious crimes, but the legal system all over the country, I think the judges, it's their job to get dangerous people off the street. They don't
But in the numbers I have, and I'll come across them in a minute, half or more, depending upon the state, they're not violent criminals that are incarcerated, including Oklahoma.
That's correct. Yes.
I mean, do we have to relook at punishments? And I'll give you an example. You can get caught with marijuana or some drugs and a gun, and you might do 20 years. But you can be a pedophile, and you're out in 6.
Yes.
I don't understand that. Is there something on your side that you see that maybe we're not seeing that on the outside? I mean,
Well, I think in the court system, they should focus themselves on sending more people to rehabilitation and maybe put them on probation. And as a condition of probation, they have to go to rehabilitation, not just sentence them to so many years.
When some of the research I was doing, I wrote this thought down as are we locking up people we're pissed off at and we don't have a place for, instead of people we should be in fear of and in danger of? It seems like we're just locking a bunch of people up that we're pissed off at versus people that are dangerous. Like, there's just a lot of people in there, and I'm not condoning drugs, I'm not condoning a lot of things, but when over half of your prison system is non-violent offenders and they're doing as much time or more than violent offenders, there's something wrong.
Yes, there is.
Doesn't long-term incarceration lead to mental illness in a lot of cases?
Oh, yes, it does. Yes.
So we're creating a bigger problem,
Yes.
and we're creating a lot of mental illness
Yes.
through our Department of Corrections at any level. Most of us that are going to watch this, we've never been to prison. The only thing I can contribute it to is maybe somebody that was a POW, and until basically Iraq, we didn't have terms called post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Can people that have been incarcerated come out with PTSD?
Well, in prisons, there's occasionally there's fights, there's stabbings, which other inmates witness, and as a result of that, they get PTSD.
Sexual misconduct and...
Well, in prisons, there's no tolerance for sexual misconduct. We have a term that's called PREA, P-R-E-A. It's a Prison Rape Elimination Act. And we have phone numbers in each unit. And if they've been a victim of PREA or somebody knows of somebody, they can just dial up that number, and we take it very seriously.
But wouldn't the repercussions of that, if they found out, wouldn't you be deemed a snitch? I mean, if you've already been held down, especially you're a man, you've been held down and raped, and then you're going to get on a phone and call. I don't know that, I don't know, does that system seem to work?
Oh, yes, I think so. Yes, very much.
Because it seems like the retaliation of that would be way worse.
Yes, for being a snitch.
Yeah.
Yes. But no, they got to protect themselves, and that's what we try to tell them. It's not tolerable, shouldn't be tolerated. Like, for instance, if a staff member, just the least sexual thing that they do, even touch a female, on an arm or something, that might be considered a PREA. And then the staff that does that gets immediately fired, walked off the facility, and then they face street charges for rape. So it's not tolerated at all.
How do you balance the manipulation of that, though? Because I know especially female inmates can be very manipulative.
Yes.
So there has to be a full investigation, and I'm sure cameras are everywhere because, and you in our conversations in the past, you've talked about how females are just emotionally and they're manipulative, and they have an agenda a lot of times when they're talking to you. So I mean, as a guard or a worker, it seems like you'd be walking on eggshells around them a lot.
Well, you just have to realize what's permitted and what's not permitted. Being friendly is okay, but touching or making any sexual comments, there shouldn't be none of that. And they have the Department of Corrections in every prison system has internal affairs, which when somebody is accused of a PREA, they first of all they get walked off the facility immediately. And then comes internal investigation, which they are very serious and they want to get all the facts.
One of the things I researched, I went back like in the history of the prison and incarceration system, and I was amazed at what I found. It's almost contradictory to what we have today. Broadmoor Prison, Eastern State Penitentiary, was the first to isolate inmates individually. They had sunlight coming through each cell, like a sunroof coming into the deal. Was for 142 years. They had 75,000 prisoners over their course. 300 prisons around the world copied their basic design. They were trying to concentrate more on providing peace. I read that the reason for the sunlight was so that the people felt like God could see into their cell, and the sunlight was healing and almost a chance for repentance. Do you feel like the way prisons are built now, that it's counterproductive for mental health and for rehabilitation?
Oh, yes, I do. But most prisons, they're allowed to go around the facility until there's count time. And they have, like, during the daytime, there's like 3 count times where they have to go back to the unit, or the staff that has them, like, say, in the church or in the classroom, or if we have them to be talking to we have to report to central control that we have these inmates and we're watching them. So, or they have to go back to the unit to be counted individually.
But to never have, or to have limited sunlight and limited, and I'm definitely not trying to make or assume that we need to be easier on our inmates. I mean, some of them deserve to be there and away from society forever. But I see, and in personal reaction, I have a kid that we've taken out of prison, and he's in my program, and he kept telling me, I'm dealing with things, coach. I'm trying to deal with being free. I'm trying to get my mind right. And I talked to somebody, a mentor of mine now, Pastor Dixie with Rings of Freedom, and Pastor Dixie said give him some time. He only did 6 years, but we don't know what trauma he's been through. We don't know what he's seen. And I've watched the kid metamorphosize now for the good. He was messed up emotionally and mentally for being in 6 years.
Yes.
And a lot of lockdown and a lot of time, no sunlight, not. So just because you're free to roam around, I don't think people understand, 100 years ago, and almost 200 years ago, they had a better idea of every cell had sunlight compared to now. I mean, I think, is there anything that they could do that would help fight mental illness? Because I think if we're creating mental illness in the Department of Corrections, we're just making a more violent, more vulnerable environment in prison, and then we have a more uncontrollable and more unstable human being when they come out.
Yes. It takes a lot of adjustment once they get out, especially those that don't have any family members to support them. They don't have really a job to go to. Very few of them do. We have a program, at least in Oklahoma, called Ricketts, which helps them rehabilitate once they get out of prison. And they refer them for jobs to halfway houses where they can go out 8 hours a day and work to make some money, and then they help them get contacts so they can get a job again. Hook them up with a lot of social services.
Right.
Don't look at prisons so negatively because they get to roam around, and we have typically open dormitories if it's a medium security or a lower security prison, because we have 3 levels.
Mm-hmm.
Those in medium and lower security, they have the chance to roam around, to interact with other people, and they live in a dormitory, so they're not in a prison cell. Now, in the maximum security, like McAllister here in Oklahoma, then they're locked down 23/7. They get an hour of exercise per day, and whenever they come out of the cell, they typically have to have 2 officers, and they're handcuffed or they have leg chains on them, and they're considered high security. In every prison, we have what's called a segregated housing unit. Mm-hmm. Now it's called special management, but there they're locked down 23/7, and whenever they come out of there, they're supposed to have 2 officers because they're considered dangerous and violent just because they committed some infraction at the prison. But the whole object of the prison system is the more freedom that the inmates are allowed, the better results that they have, and so it's used infrequently. The less frequently, the better.
I was studying the prison system even before I met you, and then I saw a door open with you through my nonprofit. I want to do something in the prison system, and I'm trying to develop a program that maybe we can do together. In looking into this, and I'll get into it a little bit more later on, but I found that a lot of the prison systems have removed the weights and all those things. I understand a weight being used as a weapon, but I started researching for this, and maybe it's just not public knowledge. I spoke at the Tulsa Boys Home one time, and there was 50 kids there, and all 50 of them said they had been diagnosed with anger issues. Well, when I went through them and talked to them, these kids one had been sold for drugs by his mom. One was given to somebody for a car and drugs, and he was sexually molested for years. One kid rebelled because he watched his mom over and over, prostitute in the house. And so I told every one of them, I said, you have a reason to be mad. You have every reason to be mad. But it's what you do with it that's important. Yes. And are you in control of your anger, or is your anger controlling you? Even Jesus in the synagogue showed anger. He went in there and threw the mob out, but he wasn't out of control. He was in control of his anger. And so working out, being a coach and fight coach, and lifting weights is a huge mental and physical and emotional plus.
Yes.
Why would they take all these? Why are they doing that, or why have they done that?
Well, maybe 20 years ago they had access to weights and gym, but they can be considered weapons. The weight bars, the weights themselves, they can be used. And then we've had a few riots in Oklahoma that, like Blacks, the Crips, or the Bloods, which are gangs within the black community, they usually fight the white supremacists. And it's like maybe 10 of each that meet at a certain time and they whack each other. 5 or 6 ended up in the hospital. Maybe a couple get killed. So since then, all the weights were taken out of prisons.
In what I know from being on the outside and dealing with people that have come out, they're going to find a way if they want to. I mean, I just personally think, and I want to know your professional opinion, inmates are going to find a way to get you, each other. They're either going to beat each other down. I've heard stories of stomping jaws and teeth. I've heard from shanks. I've heard, suffocating. I've heard all these things. I am almost led to believe, after talking to some people that have been incarcerated for years and years, and it may be a biased opinion from them being ex-convicts, they feel like Department of Correction systems, that the inmates a lot of times were in better shape than the guards. Mm-hmm. And maybe part of the reason they took the weights and things out was because a lot of the inmates, a mass majority of the inmates, were stayed in better shape than the guards. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a correlation there as to why they got rid of that stuff for security reasons in that aspect?
I don't think so, no.
No?
The officers that we have are very well trained before they start performing their duties at the prison. And one thing you forgot to mention, talking about shanks and weapons, is the lock in the sock. Mm-hmm. They have
padlocks
for their locker.
Right.
And then if they put that in a sock and start whirling around, that can cause serious damage to somebody else.
But that's my point. There's so many ways to fabricate or come up with a weapon that they took the one thing that's probably the most beneficial in prison systems, and that's exercise away. Yes. Mm-hmm. And the ones that really want to exercise, I mean, yeah, they're ones doing push-ups and pull-ups, and they use their bunk mates and buddies, and they're doing body squats and all these things.
Playing basketball.
Right, but I just can't get into my head, especially as a fight coach and how secure the weights better, or secure the area better, or secure the inmates better with going in and out of the weight area.
I just inventory.
Yeah, I just don't see how the removal of those benefited mental health and physical health at all.
No, it didn't.
I think it helps decline it when physical activity helps everybody mentally, emotionally, and physically.
Yes.
And so when they take that away from the inmates, I think they're increasing the potential for violence versus decreasing it. You agree with that?
It's a good way, physical exercise, to vent and to decrease your anger.
Do you agree with taking the weights away as a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist? I mean, do you think that the good of taking them away outweighs the bad?
Well, I would wish that they would still have a lot of weights and things to do, physical activity to vent, but at the same time, the first priority in a prison is security. And so it's up to security whether they can have those items or not. And for instance, in my case, I'm there basically to help security, to keep these people mentally stable so that they don't commit bad things while they're in prison. Above all things, in a prison, security takes priority.
We talked on this a little bit. I went into 2 homeless areas in the last couple of weeks, and talking about mental health, I was like, well, the best place to find poor mental health is with the homeless. One of the things I noticed was I didn't find any Latinos. They were all a few Indians. Most of them were or Native Americans, I should say, whites and blacks.
Yes.
Do you see that on the inside too? I guess you kind of said that. Do you treat very many Latinos on the inside for mental illnesses?
No. Latinos, I think, as a culture, they're more stoic. They don't want to admit that they have any mental health problems. Plus, they're very supportive of each other. So if somebody has a problem, they have a whole bunch of friends around them. And
even in prison?
Even in prison, yes.
Okay.
And in those countries, mental illness is not viewed very kindly. So the family, because in Latino countries, family is a big thing, they keep them hidden from society. If they have a son that's schizophrenic, or they usually keep them at home because they don't want either their friends or relatives to find out.
In the news, especially going into a political year, we're hearing about immigration. And millions of people have come across the border in this last administration, millions. But what's crazy is we're still not seeing them homeless on the street. Mm-hmm. So let's say there's 10, 20 million new people here in the last year or two, but we're still seeing Americans that are homeless. We talked about this. The people coming across the Mexican border, I don't know the percentage. I didn't find that, but they're not all Mexican. They're
Central American, South American.
Yeah, India. I mean, Middle East. I mean, they're Chinese coming across. And we're going to research this more, John and I, and I'm going to try to recruit Pastor Dixie. But I've not seen an Asian. I've not seen a Latino, a Venezuelan, Panamanian, Colombian, Peruvian, Argentinian. None of those are homeless. Mm-hmm. So from your viewpoint, mentally and culturally, what do you think's happening there?
Well, I think even before they come to the United States, a lot of them have family here who are very supportive because that's their culture. They're very hard workers. So as soon as they get here, they're even undocumented, but they'll go find a job that will accept people that are not documented. They're very hard work. A lot of them have a lot less incidence of drug abuse, drug addiction.
So they have less drug addiction than maybe American people do. In dealing with some of the following types of people, some things that you can tell us about them that you've learned might be in the communities with us. So have you dealt with very many murderers in your career?
Yes, I have.
Are there different kinds, mentally or emotionally? Is there different types of murderers?
Yes. Well, as a type of murderers, for instance, there's the ones that are usually like it's a crime of passion. Like they find their wife in bed with another guy. It's a crime of passion and they kill one person. And it's not pre-planned. Basically, those people, I think they can be trusted. I don't think they'll ever kill a fly ever in their life again. Then there's a serial killer. Now, serial killers, that's very serious. I personally believe they should throw away the key and never let them out. The same with molesters, child molesters, or rapists. I don't think there's any rehabilitation for that, and they should throw the key away and keep them in. We used to have rehabilitation in the prison system, but they found out over the years that it wasn't very effective. Plus, it costs money to hire the staff to do that, and a lot of them get out and we just recidivate. That's what we call when they commit another crime.
In my research for this, and I've always heard this and thought this, and of course I'm biased, and now that I have a 10-year-old daughter, I'm I'm as far right as you can possibly be about this. Of all of the crimes in this country that people are in prison for, the one that seems to have zero rehabilitation and the highest repeat offenders are sex offenders. Rapists are second to child molesters. Mm-hmm. What is it about that the people, the general person, because I think that most good people have a sickness and a hatred for this act. And now with these new movements that are coming in, they're trying to actually change the name of pedophile to, and I may have this abbreviation wrong, but it's something like attracted to minors, something. It's a new something. They're trying to get it a sexual normalcy or approval, so there's no more pedophilia. And you have these organizations that are pushing that agenda, the more liberal organizations. I have several gay friends, and even they are against it. But a lot of these national gay organizations or whatever are pushing these kind of agendas. And all the statistics show, and everything shows that, one, sir, by the time they catch a pedophile, it's rarely their first time.
You're correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
And two, the sentences are less than a lot of drug cases, and they're out. And three, the highest repeat offense rate. What is wrong with our system? And can you tell us something clinically as to why that is? Why do they repeat offend?
Well, I believe that there are sexual abusers or physical abusers. I think it's repetitive behavior. It's similar to an addiction. Rehabilitation, first of all, to do rehabilitation, the person has to be motivated. And they might say they are, but most of those offenders sexual, physical offenders, they don't realize that they have a problem, or they won't admit that they have a problem.
So would you deem it a mental illness, or would you deem it more of an addiction and a choice?
I think it's a choice, yes.
As I'm sitting here right now, and a lot of people watching this may come against me, but bad press is good press. I don't care. That infuriates me even more. Mm-hmm. If you'd have looked at me with your expertise in dealing with Department of Corrections and all that you've seen, and you just said it's a mental illness, mm-hmm. because a schizophrenic doesn't choose to be schizophrenic. A bipolar doesn't choose to be bipolar. Mm-hmm. So you're telling me that most pedophiles, based on your professional opinion, mm-hmm. it's not a mental illness. No. They're making the choice to be a predator.
Yes.
Have you sat in front of some of these people and talked to them?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I know you have a godly heart, and you're an educated man, you're a good man. What's your view when you're sitting there in front of them and you're listening? I mean, are they truthful to you? Are they playing the game? Are they, as a man and as a professional, what's your thoughts?
Well, in the first place, I don't know too much about pedophiles or murderers because I'm there to help them out. So I look at their chart and I only have access to their medical chart. I don't get involved in their jacket, that they call it, where it lists all their crimes and court hearings and et cetera, right. et cetera. So I don't really care why they're in prison. I'm just there to help them out no matter what crime they committed.
But based on your medical profession or your medical knowledge, you, in looking at their medical charts, you could look at a person's medical chart probably and go, oh, he's, by their meds, their behavior, their treatment, oh, they're bipolar schizophrenic, or they're, and when you look at a pedophile's medical chart, you're not seeing anything that says it's a mental disorder.
No, I don't have access to what their charges are.
Right.
If they volunteer them, or sometimes I can see that whatever crime they commit affects their mental health, then we do talk about that. But that's infrequent.
Do you feel like most, in your professional opinion, pedophiles were sexually abused themselves?
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. Usually a person that has been physically, sexually abused as they were growing up, they tend to repeat that behavior.
What happens to someone like that mentally, emotionally, to cause them, after that trauma that they've been through, to recreate and do that themselves?
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of them have what's called an antisocial personality disorder, which most people think is antisocial, where they don't socialize. But no, these people are very slick, very conniving. They don't obey no rules. And they think that they're not going to be caught.
So they're almost narcissistic too.
To a certain extent, yes.
So explain what a sociopath is.
A sociopath is what I just described, is antisocial personality disorder.
But they're not antisocial.
No. That's another personality disorder called asocial.
Okay.
Those are the ones that isolate, don't have friends, don't care about relatives. But antisocial are kids. Well, it starts by being kids, and then it's pre-adolescent. It's called conduct disorder. Somehow, from their parents and their close society in general, they don't respect any rules. It's okay to do drugs, to sell drugs.
So is that
they connive people into cheat them out of things. Like sell me this, but I'll never pay you back for it.
So is that a learned behavior or a mental disorder then?
No, that's not a mental disorder. Personality disorders are personality. They're ingrained in the person.
So it's their character and their personality. Okay.
And there's other personality disorders as well.
I have some here we're going to get into. So tell me about schizophrenia.
Yes.
That is mental illness.
Yes, it is.
And tell me about that, sir.
Oh, that's it's a chemical overproduction of a brain chemical, mainly one called dopamine. Mm-hmm. And that if there's an excess of dopamine, they start hallucinating, auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations usually, and they start getting paranoid. They think everybody is against them, and then they might react violently when they're really paranoid. That's what schizophrenia is.
So schizophrenia is that your brain's releasing too much dopamine for too long a period.
Yes.
Which explain something, just as I'm sitting here. So through law enforcement and then through my nonprofit trying to help people stay off drugs, people that have been on what they call long runs of methamphetamine or drugs like that, they've had hallucinations. They've done so. Is that what's happening? That's why they call it dope. It's releasing the dopamine, and so basically through methamphetamine and ice and things like that, they're basically entering into the mindset of a schizophrenic then for long periods of time.
You could put it that way, yes.
Could long-term drug use make you schizophrenic?
Typically not. It's an inherited illness.
Ah, okay. So if you're a hardcore meth user, ice user, and even though you may have hallucinated and all these things, once you're clean, typically the schizophrenic episodes or similarities would go away.
Yes, typically yes.
Okay, and bipolar.
Yes, that's also called manic depressive. Those are people that have big mood swings from being depressed, severely depressed, to being euphoric, super happy. And when they're super happy, they think they can dominate anything, that they have extra, more or less powers than anybody else. They become impulsive, they're euphoric, and some crimes can be committed because of that.
I watched the documentary and I was amazed by this. I'm a huge fan of him now as a person and as a boxer. But I want to spend a day or a week with this guy from both sides. One, from him as a boxer. And two, because Tyson Fury has been diagnosed as bipolar.
Yes.
And his wife should get an award. I watched the documentary on him, and I don't know if you've seen it. It's phenomenal, and it talks and it shows him. It's got to be exhausting to be around somebody who's bipolar.
Oh yes. I know him as a boxer, but not as a.
So he'll do things like even in the episode, he knows they're filming, where he'll say, "Hey," he'll tell the whole family, his dad, "Pack up. I bought 6 plane tickets. We're going to Venezuela, or we're going somewhere. We're gonna stay on the beach." And then the next morning he'll wake up. He's like, "We're not effing going there. I don't want to go there." Like it just changes day by day, hour by hour sometimes. And so literally they don't ever know, which leads me to what to expect. But he also suffers from, there's times when he alienates himself. He's exhausted and depressed. So is that just a characteristic of bipolar, or a lot of times does bipolar lead to schizophrenia? Because I hear those two terms a lot together.
Yes. Well, especially when you're manic, you can become psychotic, which is what schizophrenia is. They hallucinate and they become delusional, fixed.
Yeah, I don't think he's that far. I don't think he's schizophrenic. He's just really bipolar. So you can be a professional boxer, a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, and be bipolar.
Yes, you can.
So is that medicated? Or
yes, that's the main treatment for it.
So when people are on medication, I've found this out too. Most of the time when there's problems, even with schizophrenia, it's because they either self-medicate or they stop medicating. Right?
Well, that's a lot of problems with methamphetamine or marijuana or any other drug. They are trying to self-medicate their mental illness.
So with schizophrenia, increasing the dopamine in the brain, from my law enforcement background and things, we refer to meth and ice, those sort of things, as dope.
Yes.
And that comes from whether most people on the street know it or not, it comes from the fact that those things release dopamine into your brain. And now fentanyl, it supersonically increases that dopamine.
Yes.
And if they're on that stuff long term, I've had people that I've helped through my program that said one time a guy, I won't name his name, but he said he was high on meth for like 28 days straight. And the reason he got caught was he was in his front yard fighting spirits, he said, and there was the wind, and he was hallucinating. And then when the police came, he fled, and he actually jumped on a train and went to another state. And when he came down off of it, he didn't even know where he was in another state and everything because he'd been on this train. So drugs can increase the dopamine in your brain, which is the high that people are chasing. Is
Yes.
that right? But you said that typically if they stop doing the fentanyl, the meth, the ice, the schizophrenia, or those schizophrenic tendencies will stop. Symptoms will
Yes.
stop.
They will get back to normal.
It's the dopamine release that they're addicted to, right?
Yes, you could put it that way. Yes.
I've heard a lot of people that I've talked to, they said when you first hit really good meth or really good ice, that you never get that high again.
Yes.
What is that? Because it's a shock to the brain, and the brain, why is it they say the first time that synthetic drug releases dopamine, maybe is that better than
Why
the
is
rest
it
of
better?
why is it a better high than they ever get again?
Well, because they become tolerant to the medication, to the drug.
Ah, okay.
So the more you use a drug, you're going to become tolerant to its effects. So it's not going to have the same effect. So they have to use more.
Fentanyl is a horrible epidemic
Oh,
right now. It's in the news.
50 times more potent
And
than meth.
I've actually seen and heard people say that they want that dopamine death. They're willing to risk dying and ODing to basically what you're telling me now is to release as much dopamine as they can without basically stopping their heart and everything else to get it. That's the
Yes.
high they're after.
Yes.
It's Russian roulette.
I know. And nowadays, a lot of drug dealers lace
Everything.
methamphetamine or other drugs with fentanyl because that will make them more addicted.
I just had a friend, I won't mention his name, that you and I both know. He got depressed due to injury, and he hadn't done pills in a long time, and he went and bought 3 pills, took a half of one, and he felt fine. 45 minutes later, he went and took the other 1.5, and he basically died in his front room and was brought back to life because even, they press pills now. And he said these pills look just like normal. They had the numbers on them and everything, but they were fentanyl.
Yes.
And almost lost a great friend. Basically, these drugs are messing with the brain, and the drugs, we can have drug-induced mental illness then.
Drug-induced
Psychosis, long-term, or what you guys call it, clinical or chronic, right? If it's long-term psychosis.
Well, if you use drugs, it's going to be it's usually short-term, acute psychotic episode.
Oh, okay.
But whenever they start using drugs again, then it's going to become another acute psychotic episode.
You said something a minute ago about marijuana and depression and all these other things. We were talking about self-medicating and things. There's so many huge topics that tie in with what you do that I don't think the general public, like, you should be a consultant for local news, because I think when they give these stories, they need to educate us as viewers. So everybody thinks that marijuana, and I'm not for or against it. I think it depends on the individual, and I think it depends on, I like to have a glass of scotch. I'll have a beer with you, but I'm not going to run around all day in your awesome Tonka truck, and drinking. And does marijuana hurt or exacerbate or some of these mental illnesses if you're smoking marijuana or taking THC? Does it mess with depression? Does it mess with any psychosis of any kind?
Marijuana might make you depressed, but I'm not a user or anything like that. But I think marijuana is too exaggerated. I think marijuana helps with a lot of things. It helps people calm down. It relaxes them. Typically, people high on marijuana are, when they're stoned, they're not violent at all. They're more relaxed. They're giggling.
Does marijuana, let's say excessive use of marijuana, is it linked to any mental illness at all?
Well, it affects you organically.
Tell me about that.
Eventually, it'll kill too many brain cells to where you're not as astute or as intelligent as you once were.
So it can affect you
in the long
intellectually
term. In the long term, yes.
Huh.
Related to that topic, I think alcohol, that's the one that should be sanctioned more than marijuana is. Because people that are drunk typically become very aggressive, impulsive. They start beating their wives. They must start beating their kids.
So how does
They
how
become
do they
violent.
react? How does our body react to those two things differently? Because they're both, wouldn't you call, and I may be wrong, aren't they both suppressants?
Alcohol, yeah, it's a depressant.
So
After a few hours of the euphoria, it becomes a depressant.
so how does they interact? So what is it that makes, they're both close related, but alcohol tends to make people more aggressive, and marijuana and THC rather makes them less aggressive.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Is it a chemical breakdown in our brain?
Yes, it affects different chemicals in your brain.
Can you explain that a little bit? Most of us have no idea what that means.
Well, alcohol, in the short term, a few hours after you use it, might increase your dopamine, your serotonin level, norepinephrine level in your brain, and actually marijuana tends to cool down all those neurochemicals.
So we can actually stimulate the epinephrine release of our brain, in our brain?
Yes, that's what psychiatric medications, a lot of them do that.
That's incredible. So
Increase.
I know that epinephrine's used as the first line of drug when you have allergies. We also topically, as a professional cut man, I use epinephrine or adrenaline 1000 on cuts to constrict. So you're basically increasing your adrenal gland then, right? Or the adrenals, if the epinephrine is released, or no?
Yes, or even your parts of your brain can secrete norepinephrine or adrenaline, and
Well-
serotonin as well, and then the dopamine we already talked about.
It'd be nice as an athlete if I could teach my fighters to be able to somehow
Get manic before a fight.
mentally increase their epinephrine levels and go, yeah, I'll be manic before a fight,
Yes.
but calm. That would be.
It can get out of control real easy.
In talking about this, again, we have a common something we both know. This individual, I'm telling you, he has the attention span of a fish or a moth, and he's constantly having to do something, and so he's basically been on Adderall most of his life. And it seems, because when I was in school, we had counselors, we had school counselors, and they actually talked to students. And we had learning disabled, and we had behavioral issues. I mean, I was a little knucklehead in school too. But it seems like now they're just prescribing stuff like crazy. Do you feel, in your opinion, that a lot of these, especially at a young age, that doctors are prescribing things too much, things like the Adderall and stuff like that, to stop? And I don't even know if you would call ADD or a lot of these problems that they're writing drugs for. I mean, are those mental issues, or where does that come from?
Oh, ADD, attention deficit disorder, now it's called. It used to be attention deficit disorder without hyperactivity or attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity. Since a few years ago, they're both considered the same thing, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And typically it's like amphetamines, like the Adderall, the Ritalin.
Aren't those synthetic, basically methamphetamine?
Yes, very similar. But in somebody that has ADHD, they calm them down. They help them focus. They help them stay on task. They're not jumping from one thing to another. They complete things. They're not impulsive. But I don't think, as far as being overprescribed, I don't believe that's the case, mostly because they are very controlled substances. If you prescribe them, you always have to put your Drug Enforcement Administration number in there. You can only give them a 30-day supply with no refills. They have like 48 hours to fill the prescription, and it's very controlled substance.
Would something like, I'll use John over here. Let's say little Johnny comes to me. He's 10 years old, and his mom's like, he's just out of control. Would exercise, hard exercise, martial arts, boxing, would it help ADD at all? Does it help to exercise to control that, or?
Well, exercise is always beneficial.
Okay.
But no, because it's an innate problem in their neurochemicals, so they need medication.
So it's long term. It doesn't ever go away.
No, used to be in the old times, we thought that once they reached puberty, adolescence, that the ADHD would go away. But that is not the case. I see a lot of adults that continue with the same symptoms.
So what happens if you're ADD and you superdose yourself? Does it then just become like taking meth or speed? Or does it slow them down even more?
I think if taking an ecstasy would make you more like manic, euphoric.
I see. In just me studying and knowing a little bit, so somebody like you who's very laid back, very passive, very thought processed, if you took it, it would be speed to you then, wouldn't it?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
So I'd be doing an interview with Kramer on Seinfeld right now if I gave you too much Adderall.
Yes.
Okay. Which we might try. I know that when we were in school, when I was in school, they said the attention span of the average student was 45 to 55 minutes. And that's why classes were
45 minutes.
Right. Now they say that the average attention span of this younger generation is 6 to 12 minutes. What has happened with this newer generations mentally that they've got it? Like my daughter, she'll be making bracelets and necklaces, watching a video on her phone or iPad, and watching TV. Like they're
multitasking.
Are their brains opening up more to take in all this sensory and do all these things, or is it detrimental to the newer generation to have to be stimulated with all these things? From a mental aspect, what's your view of that?
I think it's detrimental. Well, with video games, they become addicted to them, and they have more trouble focusing on other things. For instance, if they're doing video games a lot on their phone or the tablet, to them, classes are boring. So they'd rather have the constant stimulation of a video game.
Right. We just basically talked about addiction. So video games can be an addiction.
Yes.
Sex can be an addiction. Drugs can be an addiction. Alcohol can be an addiction. Would you consider being a workaholic an addiction to work?
Yes.
Be an addiction?
As well.
Explain that word. What is that? Explain that word addiction, and what is all does it encompass?
Well, addiction, if they get a desired effect, like becoming euphoric, they're going to go back and try and replicate that feeling again. So they do that by drinking, they do that by using methamphetamine. If you win at a video game, that gives you a sense of euphoria. And so they become addicted to that effect of the whatever drug you're using or game you're playing.
What are some things that you know that are out there that people are using to try to stay focused or hyper-focused? I know a lot of people, and I call BS on it. Like I've had some people, they're like, I don't know why they get you for DUI when you're smoking weed because I drive better high. I'm hyper-focused. And I mean, do you believe that people that smoke weed are hyper-focused? Do you believe, or they're still under the influence, right?
Yes. Impairs their reflexes when they're driving. They won't brake as fast, turn as fast. Marijuana, one thing it does is slows time. So I think part of it, they can focus a little bit better and concentrate a little bit better.
But the reflexology and the stimulus it takes to do that, that's why they're still technically under the influence. They may be able to focus on the road better, but the stimuli that gets them to respond to something it's going to take longer.
Right.
Have you had any experience or anything about kratom?
No.
Okay.
One thing related to that, I don't know, it's a personal experience, but for Christmas one day I bought my daughter one of those video games of car racing. And after the meal and everything was done, I said, let's start playing this. And it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We were at 3 o'clock, 4 in the morning, still playing this.
Even you?
Yes. Whoever loses says one more game. Or playing baseball on the video games in the old days. And then whoever loses, one more game. Well, it's 3, 4 in the morning, no matter if you have to go to work the next day. And it's an addiction. So what I did with that game, after that first night, I put it out in the garage and it was gone. Because I was becoming addicted to it so fast.
But you saw it, and that's why you ended it.
Yes.
Speaking of video games, in the military and in law enforcement, we had what we called simulators. They're meant to raise your heart rate, make you overcome your sympathetic nervous system, so your audio, your visual, all those things, you can fight through that like an active shooter or being in combat. I look at the video games now, they're so much more detailed in every aspect than military and law enforcement simulators. And part of that, which I think you'll appreciate with your mindset, part of why you want to go through those training scenarios, both physically in what we call shoot houses or whatever, and through simulators, is to desensitize you to those situations.
So the violence. Or...
Do you feel, and I've always felt this, I'm excited about asking you this question, do you feel that maybe some of these active shooters and these things that are going on now with our youth and the killings of our youth, because the ages are getting younger, do you feel like they're being desensitized mentally and emotionally through these detail-oriented graphic games that they're playing?
Oh, definitely, yes. When you play video games that involve violence, then all of a sudden violence becomes something that is okay to do. Shooting at somebody in a video game, they start believing that that's normal to do, normal human behavior. And so they imitate that and they don't think about the consequences.
I can't remember the exact number, but I was reading a study where it talks about the average teenager over a course of just a small period of time, a couple of years, if they're into those games, will kill over 100,000 times. Mm-hmm. What does that do to you as a kid or a teenager? What does that do to you mentally? And because you're visually taking that in and you're absorbing all that, what does that do to you, and how does that change you mentally?
Well, eventually you start thinking that what's in the video game becomes okay to do. And so your mind is predisposed to committing violence.
Do you remember the Columbine High?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of viewers may not remember that, but you know, that Dungeons and Dragons and things was a big deal back then. The main guy behind that was a big person in that deal when he set those bombs and the shooting things at Columbine. And so even back then, they taught us in the academy, they talked about that and told us some things that the general public didn't know. I don't think that guns are the problem in our society. I think that what's stimulating this new generation, as you're talking about, we're talking about right now with drugs and people call it liberalism, but it's really just, it's not just that. It's about if a kid's killing graphically, I mean, the special effects on these games is phenomenal.
Yes.
I walked into a friend of mine's house one day a couple years ago, and he has a big screen TV about half the size of this wall, and he was talking on a headset, you could hear him, to somebody in another country, and they were talking back and forth, and it's a Black Ops game. And I got to tell you, full surround sound theater, everything in this room, I had goosebumps and chills come over me because it sounded exactly like the comms coming in the military. Mm-hmm. Everything, like when I walked in there, my sympathetic nervous system picked up on this stuff and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. It was so real. Mm-hmm. I don't see how it can't be changing a whole generation.
Oh, it does, yes.
And how do we educate youth about this? I mean, how do we, because they'll argue it. I mean, and parents use it as a babysitter. Mm-hmm. And I'd rather them be upstairs playing Black Ops than out on the street or whatever. But we're really hurting. I mean, we're changing their mindset. We're dehumanizing them, would you say?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I think it's a privilege or something to reward good behavior during the day. Maybe half an hour of video games, limited. But nowadays, parents, it takes them less work to take care of their kids if they just throw them to the side and they get self-entertained with the video games. For that, they don't value relationships as much. They don't go out with their friends as much. The video games are just a babysitter, which is going to damage them in the long run.
I think it will damage them in relationships. I know people personally that marriages have been terminated because somebody gets, they get addicted to video games and they just ignore their responsibilities and everything else, and it's basically a drug.
Yes.
Can video games release dopamine?
Yes, it can. Yes.
So it's not just a physical habitual thing. It can actually become a chemical addiction.
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible.
They still get mental rewards for doing that.
We were talking about social disorders, and I think there's a lot of confusion about these. I know I was until I started researching, and I was really excited about this also. So basically there are 4 types, I may be wrong, of personality disorders. Why are they called personality disorders? Are they not mental disorders? And those are antisocial personality disorder. Explain that one more time.
Oh, that's people that usually starts in childhood and adolescence where they don't obey the rules. They try to connive people. To them, laws and regulations don't apply to. That's a lot of the people that end up in prisons.
And borderline personality disorder.
Borderline typically occurs more so in females, and a lot of them have been sexually or physically abused as they were growing up.
So what does the term borderline mean then in that description?
Ever since the old days, it was believed to be that there were borderline schizophrenic. So that's why it's called borderline. But it's the symptoms are people that they get depressed, and then normal for no reason. They become impulsive. They have difficulty controlling their anger. They feel empty inside. Sometimes they love somebody one day, and then the next day they hate them for no reason at all. And then they're self-mutilators too. They cut on themselves because it releases anger.
Would you say that is typically most of your female inmates?
It affects more so females than males, yes.
Are most of your female inmates probably borderline?
No.
No?
No. I don't think most of the females have a personality disorder.
And I may say this wrong. Histrionic personality disorder?
Histrionic?
Yeah.
That's typically, there's histrionic males, but that's rare. It's usually females. And that means that they're overreactive, they exaggerate, they are trying to attract attention to themselves. They wear a lot of makeup. They're dramatic in their actions. They can be impulsive as well.
Basically, everybody on Instagram and Twitter. Right?
Well, there you are.
And tell me about narcissistic personality disorder.
Narcissistic, they feel like they're superior to everybody else. Everybody else doesn't mean a thing. They feel they deserve certain things more benefits than anybody else. And like Hitler, for instance, he was extremely narcissistic. Lenin was extremely narcissistic. They just feel they're superior to everybody else.
Both from my past learning and then doing this, I learned there's different levels of narcissism. Mm-hmm. Are there also different levels in these other personality disorders?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Because one thing you just brought up, I learned that, and I may be wrong, but in research that I found in doing this, it said every famous serial killer or every famous hitman, from Whitey Bulger to
Al Capone.
I could go out. They were all narcissistic at the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
Those as a type of psychosis, it's a mental disorder? Are those choices?
Those are
or learned behavior?
They're not actually 100% choices. It's built into their personality.
So these are learned behaviors or choices?
Well, a little bit of both, yes.
But you did say some of them could be spawned by trauma.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So
well, if they've witnessed a lot of trauma or shootings, then
or sexual immorality
or
to
they
the
think
victimized.
It's okay to do those behaviors.
These are basically choices. So I've been wrong, and I've kind of said it over the years that if somebody's selfish, self-centered, self-serving, puts themselves first in all these ways, that's a choice. But then I had somebody tell me, she was a counselor, but she said people that are narcissistic and these personality disorders, it was less of a choice. But you're telling me it is a choice, that they basically build on this, and the longer they make these choices, the more compounded it becomes in their life.
Yes. Well, we all have personality traits, they're called. When, let's say, antisocial personality, borderline, you can classify them as a normal person, or they can have traits, and then they go into the full disorder.
So tell me, what is the personality makeup of a pedophile?
A lot of times they're antisocial personality disorder, and they feel that there's not going to be any consequences to their behavior to a certain extent that it's an approved thing for them to do, and then there's a sexual addiction part of it.
The rapist, the same?
Yes.
The killer, the serial killer.
It's very similar, yes.
So we find in the media, and I've been through a lot of training through law enforcement, there's all this talk about law enforcement need more mental health training. They need all these things.
Yes.
But the people that are saying that, I don't think they understand. So I'm going to give you a scenario. Let's say I'm in law enforcement and you're doing a ride along with me because you're my buddy and you're smart. And we get called to a call. Right away, I can see that either biological mental illness or chemical induced. I don't know if those are the right terms, but one is basically organic and one is, induced by drugs or whatever. We get to this call. It turns into a critical incident situation. He has a hostage. We have what is called the use of force continuum. And based on that, in your training, you have to go up those levels of use of force and tick each one off before you can go to the next one. So I can't go from being the officer present on that call and saying, hey, let her go, put the gun down. That's command presence, blah, blah, blah. I have to try that unless the circumstances mitigate immediately getting there and shooting the suspect. You being as high as you can get with education and you're a practicing mental health professional, are you going to try to reason with that person?
I think as law enforcement, I really admire them. But if somebody's coming at you with a gun or with a knife, they have to protect themselves and protect the public as well. So the ultimate use of force would be justified in that case. But they have to go take it step by step. Try to talk to them at first, try to reason them with them, maybe try to get somebody else that's there, like their wife or daughter or something, to talk to them more personally. Please stop that, don't do that. And they have to go in that continuum. Same like in prisons, for instance, you try to use the least restrictive thing that you can. Talk to them. We have mental health staff that can talk to them and go like that until the end of the continuum is you have to lock them up.
Right.
But you try to use the least dramatic.
And I think officers try that.
Yes.
But I think the general public is expecting a lot from law enforcement when it comes to mental illness. I mean, we can't diagnose on a scene like that. No. And I mean, technically, you can't diagnose until you're at your level or a psychologist. So what do you think is one thing or something, if you were going to better prepare me as your friend, I'm just going back into law enforcement, what would you have me study or what would you have me do or know to help better deal with mental illness on the street?
Well, first of all, try and assess whether the patient is high on any kind of drugs. See if they're acting, erratically like a paranoid schizophrenic will. Sometimes people that are schizophrenic will not respond coherently to you. Try to use the least restrictive measures that you can. And that's why police get some kind of training before they get to be a police officer.
But at the end of the day, when it comes to preserving life and the wellness of the officers and civilians, have you seen, with all the news in your lifetime, have you seen just horrible wrongdoing by law enforcement?
No. Police officers or sheriff's deputies, they're not predators that are out there just trying to beat people up or shoot them. I think they're way above that.
I mean, I know that there's bad guys in my church. There's people that aren't good people everywhere. But I just, and not because I'm so pro law enforcement or that I have been law enforcement, but I think the general public doesn't understand mental illness and critical incident situations and the dynamics of being on a call to judge and what goes on the 10 o'clock news. There's so much more, isn't there?
Yes. Plus, in a crime scene, things are happening so fast that it's very hard to wrap your head around what's going on. And for instance, both here in Tulsa, I know it's called COPES, and other cities have programs similar to this where they have mental health staff on call, which the officer can call and they can come and help intervene.
Have you done any of that?
Down. No, I've
you
never
haven't
done anything like that.
Would you like to do something like that?
Yes.
I think that would be.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you say that prisons have become the new asylums since so many places are shutting down?
Yes. We've become the largest mental health hospitals that there are now. There used to be in Oklahoma, for instance, they had Veneta, which was Eastern State. Central State was in Norman. and then Western State Hospital. And these were mega hospitals. They would keep 1,000, 1,500 people there theoretically getting treatment, but it was very slow treatment. And once you got not incarcerated, admitted to Veneta or Central State, typically they would stay there at least a year, 2, 3 years. And eventually the relatives and friends started complaining because these people were just locked up, basically.
But was it the right way to do it or no? Oh.
So mental health treatment can be done in 2 weeks, maybe a month, at the most 2 months, once they're inpatient.
Right.
Not 1 or 2 or 3 years. So when the public started complaining about all these long incarcerations or hospitalizations, then the government said, oh, okay, well, we'll do a least restrictive treatment. We'll have them discharged, shut down the hospitals, and we're going to provide a lot of mental health clinics to follow up with these people. Well, that really never developed because of a lack of funding. So very few people got really connected with appropriate follow-up. So they end up committing crimes and they end up in prisons.
I remember as a kid, it was Veneta. I mean, there's signs on the turnpike, the Roe Rogers Turnpike. It says hitchhikers may be escape inmates. And John and I, the guy behind the camera over here, all the brains, he and I were up there recently, and that place is, it's a lot of things. It looks historic. It looks scary. There is a feel to that place. It's almost spiritual. It's almost an odd spookiness up there. Studying people like Charles Manson and some of these people, do you feel that there's a connection between severely mentally ill and spirituality, almost as though sometimes people become possessed? Have you see that?
No, I haven't seen that exactly. You know, what I've seen is that people in the prisons, especially the men, a lot of times I see them with a cross around their neck or a rosary, and I tell them, hey, you got the right person with you. And a lot of times they come and tell me, hey man, hey doc, these medications that you're giving me, I don't really need them. And I go, well, you're going to get sick again. Please keep taking them. He says, no, I've taken God into my life.
Okay.
And I say, hey, that's better than any medications I can give you. And at the prisons we have, they all have chapels.
Have you seen healings?
Yes.
Have you seen people get?
Yes.
So you're a Christian. You're a believer.
Catholic. Yes.
Catholic.
Well,
okay.
I'm from Mexico, so I'm Catholic.
In Mexico. Okay. Have you been in front of somebody in your career that you know is inherently just evil?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what was that like? What did you feel?
Scared.
You didn't get a sense of something spiritual there?
No.
No? I've been around some evil people, and I almost feel sometimes there's something beyond just physical. I almost feel like, you know, the Bible talks about those side of things, especially in the Old Testament. But I think there's a whole other element of spirituality that just walking onto some psych wards I've been on, or death row in prison, you feel a different atmosphere. It's almost a dark spiritual,
like an eerie thing.
Yeah. And so I believe that there's an element beyond, because like Charles Manson, he was definitely cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Mm-hmm. But he was also in
evil. Very evil.
Very. Okay. Exactly. And in saying that, as we're both godly men, you know, if you believe in evil, then you know the derivative of evil and you know the story of evil. But Charles Manson, there was also like intellect. There's times when even Hitler sounded so intelligent.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
If you go back and look at some of Charles Manson's interviews and rants, I mean, there's times where he sounded so intelligent. There's things going on right now with the government and things he was talking about in the 70s and 80s but he's totally mentally ill. But I just sometimes feel like there's a fine line between mental illness, the evilness, the spirituality, and the intellect. I've often heard that there's a fine line, and you may think this is funny, but in the secular, I've always heard there's a fine line between insanity and ingenuousness.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Maybe Hitler had a high IQ.
Oh, tremendously high, yes.
He did.
Yes.
Or maybe, so somebody like that, I think, it's kind of funny you mentioned Hitler. It was under control, but General Patton I think he was for the right of good, but
Narcissistic.
as much as Hitler. In fact, I don't think if Patton wasn't extremely narcissistic and some of these other personality disorders, he couldn't have beat Hitler. But then you see people like Charles Manson, where he talked about things that a lot of people didn't catch on to. But I studied a lot about other religions, even the demonic stuff. He talked about things like levitation, like trying to come out of his own self, the spiritual stuff. And like he told Geraldo Rivera one time, which he's an idiot. But he told Geraldo Rivera, because Geraldo Rivera was kind of making fun of him. Like, you can't do anything to me. You're in chains and you're in prison. Charles Manson started dancing around, and he said, you don't understand. He said, I'm like the wind. I can go anywhere I want. The devil worshippers and things and demonic cults, they talk about it's transference. So would you describe that as like a schizophrenia? But they talk about mentally almost leaving their bodies, and he's like, I can leave here anytime I want. I can be at your house. Do you sense like something that's beyond just mental when you're with some of these evil people?
It's a good question. I think it would be called, maybe in a lot of cases, borderline schizophrenic.
Do you believe in demons and evil as an educated psychiatric professional?
Yes, some people are just evil, severely antisocial.
And do you think there's an outside entity maybe that takes them over? Because even old Catholicism talked about that. You know, they had exorcisms, they had all these things.
Well, you don't want to accept religion, for one. I don't know about demon-possessed and that. I've never thought about that idea.
I can't shake some of the feelings I've had around people. And I don't want to sound like a kook myself, but I know that if you study the Word, that there's so much more out there that we don't know than we do. Spirituality, even the brain. They say we really don't even know
the beginnings of it.
Yeah, the beginnings of it. I've seen people change in front of me, and I believe some of it could be deep schizophrenia, psychosis. I just truly believe that some evil comes from a source other than psychosis.
Yes.
I believe that. Okay, what does it mean to be mentally incompetent to stand trial? And does somebody like you make that decision?
I can suspect it and write that in my evaluation, but that's up to the judge and to the prosecutor and the attorneys for the defense.
How are they determining somebody's mental stability when their expertise is in law and yours is in the mental being of somebody?
Well, by definition, somebody that's incompetent to stand trial does not comprehend the nature of their crime or the nature of the punishment. And so they're typically maybe bipolar manic, maybe they're schizophrenic, maybe they're mentally retarded. And so they're sent for psychiatric evaluation to the NIDA, the state hospital.
So somebody like you initially makes that decision.
Or I can tell them that I suspect this person's not competent to stand trial. And what I do not understand is that they are sent to this hospital and they committed the crime while they were hallucinating or paranoid because of their mental illness. But then they end up in jail, they get sent to Veneta, and they give them medication, and all of a sudden they restored their mental competence to stand trial. I think what should be looked at more is how was their mental state at the time of the crime.
So, and we'll wrap up with this. Mixing mentally ill with incarcerated bad guys and women. When an inmate acts up, it's in defiance and it's behavioral, right? And they're punished. They either get put in SEG or whatever. When a mentally ill person, if they were in an asylum or a hospital of some kind, it would just be a characteristic of their illness. But yet in prison, a lot of them are punished like the inmates because they're still not in compliance with the rules and the laws. That's got to be detrimental to the mentally ill, because it's a characteristic or a trait that's expected of them. You expect the schizophrenic to act a certain way, and they're going to probably break the rules in their cell, whatever, but yet you're punishing them in prisons, because prisons really aren't equipped to deal with the mentally ill, are they? Unless they're severely danger to society.
Well, at all the prisons, at least in Oklahoma, they have to have a psychiatrist for one. They always have, like with me, at every prison, I go to 3 prisons. Each one that I go to, I have two mental health professionals that are there full time that talk people down. If an officer suspects that somebody is having a mental illness and that they acted out because of it, yes, they're going to be punished, but then they will ask somebody in the mental health staff to come talk to them and evaluate them. So we are concerned about that. Another thing that so people do not feel scared or do not feel restricted, we do not charge them for any mental health service. It's free, and they can put sick calls in or they can show up and we will take care of them. Medical patients, for instance, they have to pay $4 per medical visit and $4 per prescription that they're given. So a lot of them don't put in sick calls until they're very, very sick.
So I found this out in my research, Doc, and I want your opinion of this because it's a great way to wrap all this up. In 1779, a British reformer named John Howard passed a bill through Parliament called the Penitentiary Act. Have you heard about this before?
Yes.
And this was the first official use of the word. Penitentiary is derived from the Latin term penitentia. Yeah. And meaning, do you know what that means in Latin?
Yes.
Repentance.
Right.
That goes back to when we started. They had the sunlight coming in, and they felt like we're so far from that right now in our prison systems.
Yes.
A penitentiary is a place you were sent to make repentance for a crime committed. Penitentiary can also be used as an adjective to describe something done to show penance and rehabilitation. Do you feel
they both go hand in hand?
Do you feel we're rehabilitating and showing people, leading people to repentance?
I don't think so. No, not totally. That's up to each person. That they accept that they did commit a crime, that they made a mistake, which all humans commit mistakes, some worse than others.
Through Wings of Freedom and Pastor Dixie, I'm going to start speaking in prisons. I'm just curious. This has kind of excelled me even more. Do you feel like people are given the chance and talked to on a spiritual level to given the chance and explain what repentance is? Do they get that in prison? Because that may come up in a session with you. It may come up if they seek a chaplain or whatever they call them in prison. But do you really feel like that inmates now would even know what repentance is or the beauty of it, and that it can lead to rehabilitation?
I don't think they understand that concept very well. We have chapels available, but it depends on each individual whether he wants to go. Or when I see him, I recommend things like healthy things. Exercise, maybe you should go to the chapel, maybe you should get a job, maybe you should go to school because we give them a degree in business administration, things to keep them occupied. All the prisons, we use trustees. We call them trustees because they're inmates that are well behaved, don't commit offenses in the prison. And then they get to go mow the lawn, they get to work in the kitchen, they get to cook, they get to clean around, even paint. Things that keep them occupied, which I think are beneficial, and it makes their time seem a lot shorter.
I just think that and that's maybe my goal of going in, and I may come back to you and say, I was wrong, but I just think if some hard-driven guys like Pastor Dixie's doing with Wings of Freedom, and he's feeding and helping the homeless, he's people coming out of prison, he's the one that's getting me put into the prison system. I just feel like if people, as you and I, if they have a relationship with God and they learn repentance, that maybe they'll look at themselves differently. Like I think some people can't forgive themselves, or they don't see a way out, so they just say, screw it. Do you believe if more people were connected one-on-one with a chance to repent and a chance to learn a relationship with their Creator, that it might lead to better rehabilitation?
Oh, yes, definitely. And actually, at all the prisons, we have usually at least 10 chaplains that come once a week for a few hours, and they're all volunteers. So they go and teach classes in the chapel and try to infuse those things.
Have you seen it happen? Have you seen somebody change their spirituality and then they change as a person?
Oh, yes, all the time, yes.
If I told you that I've had a 10-year dream, 10-year plan, and I want you to be a part of it, if you will, I want to design a program where I go in, and I don't know if you know what Bushido means. It's basically the spirit and the characteristics and personality of the samurai. They said you're a Bushido. I want to design a program where you're taught the characteristic traits of a Bushido. You're taught respect. You're taught honor. You're taught temperance. You're taught to control your anger. You're taught all these things that would make, and basically the Bible talks about meekness, which means power under control, to control yourself. What would you say about if we could put together a program that we went in and we taught this over a certain couple of weeks or a month, and at the end of that, we'd have to, these people are selected based on behavior and why they're there and that sort of thing, and then they were privileged to becoming a part of some type of a martial arts deal, to where they were awarded things. And then some of that may be money that could go towards, maybe, let's say that Jon here behind the camera, he was in prison and he's a relatively good guy, but he got 12 years because he was DUI and he hit and killed a family. Okay? If Jon competed in this and went through this program and passed this program, and then he got to compete and he won, we would take, like a prize fighter, we would take his money and he could go towards, maybe he could buy books for the prison, or we may give that money that he won to the victim crisis fund or to the victims themselves. Do you think like something like that would be beneficial to some of the inmates?
Yes.
To empower them, and it gives them a reason to want to change,
and that they're more in control of things. Yes.
And that restitution. What, in your opinion, if Jon gets to give this family that he, DUI and he hit and killed, and we get to go and say, on behalf of Jon, here's $2,000. It doesn't bring, Susie back, but Jon earned this through a program, and this was what he got for that.
To give back.
I think, would you say that would help heal some on the victims?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
And would it empower an inmate to know that they did some good, maybe the only good in their life?
Yes, I think so.
Would you be willing, if I kind of come up with stuff, to help me direct that and do that, and maybe get it into a medium or some place that maybe you're at, to where the Department of Corrections would approve it?
I think so, yes.
I'd love to do that. I appreciate you so much. Okay. I appreciate your time having us into your home. Right away, Jon and I loved your saltwater fish tank here. That's awesome.
I'm glad.
I'm so glad you walked into my life. And man, you just broke your patella, and your wife had surgery. You guys are, that's why we're here, kind of doing this right here. And I know in the podcast you're going to hear household noises because we're in a household with people functioning. Yes. But man, I really appreciate you. I appreciate the work you're doing.
I'm glad you came into my life.
And I think it's divinity. I think you're doing a great thing. Appreciate you. All right, another episode of The Truth Behind the Smoke.